O flower of Scotland,
When will we see your light again? That fought and died for your weavers hill and glen, and stood against him. Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward to think again. The hills are bare now, and autumn leaves lie thick and still. All land is lost now, which those so dearly held, but stood against him. Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward to think again. Those days are past now, and in the past they must remain. But we can still rise now, and be a nation again that stood against him. Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward to think again.
Well, dear friends, a year has passed since we gathered in the Macintosh Institute to mark the immortal memory of Robert Burns. And what a shocker that year has been. Wildfires in Australia and California, the deliberate slash and burn of tropical rainforest in Brazil and Southeast Asia, COVID-19, Trump and a dozen like-minded dictators, crashing international institutions and cooperation, ongoing misery in Yemen and Syria, a refugee crisis, economic disruption, enslavement of Uyghur Muslims in China, and Britain fouling its international reach and reputation by leaving the EU and cutting its international aid budget. What would Robert Burns have made of all this? Well, I think his astute and canny observations of events and politics, expressed through his poetry and song, would have been just as relevant and influential today as it was in his time. Exposing injustice and hypocrisy and using satire aimed at and landing on its intended targets, he would have focused public awareness and opposition to the brutalization of society and the natural environment that we have witnessed, particularly over the past 5 years. He would also, I'm sure, have built the same admiration and following as he achieved in his own short lifetime. Robert Burns was born 262 years ago, on the 25th of January 1759 in Alloway, Ayrshire. And he too entered a world of ferment and uncertainty. Scotland was still struggling with its loss of statehood in 1707. The Highlands were becoming depopulated through landowner greed and persecution, and life as a tenant farmer, even in more prosperous Ayrshire, was hard, threadbare and hungry. Despite these vicissitudes, the late 18th century was also a time of enlightenment. Science, literature, education, technological innovation and growing international trade were all challenging the old order. Revolution too was fermenting in America, and France and Ireland, and Burns saw and understood this and took a progressive position, sometimes anonymously, supporting the repressed, which doubtless was also a reflection of his own early life experiences. The immortal memory of Robert Burns is a product of this extraordinary creativity and insight that he had. And I would like to mention a couple of few of his views that are still greatly relevant to global issues today. Do not ask for warranty regarding events, dates, attributed quotes, or anything else that I may purport to be factual about Robert Burns, because I can't offer that. Like Tam O'Shanter, all following facts were acquired while we sit boozing in the dappy and getting full and unco happy, basically drunk in the pub. Robert Burns's poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialect, was published in 1786. He was 27 years of age and had already acquired a colourful reputation and first-hand experience of opposite-sex relationships, of which he freely wrote. He may well be viewed as a womanizer and philanderer, and that reputation is probably the best place to start this discussion today. However, I believe that Burns just openly and genuinely celebrated the pleasures of the flesh, an exquisitely enjoyable activity that could not be rationed or controlled by the state or the ruling classes, and which fundamentally underpins the existence of the human species. Despite public opprobrium, chiefly from the Kirk, he continued that predilection throughout his life. Here is the first verse and chorus of his song, Why Should Nae Poor Folk Mow? Mow being an old slang term for the sex act itself. And these verses were written both to applaud the success of the French Revolution and the ubiquitous pleasure of sex. When princes and prelates and het-heated zealots all Europe has set in a low, the poor man lies down, nor envies a crown, and comforts himself with a low. And why shouldna poor folk mow? And why shouldna poor folk mow? The great folk have silver and houses and lands. Poor bodies hae nothing but mow. Brilliant. That was written in 1792. But here's one verse from the Rigs of Barley, written in 1782, but probably recounted from when he was a teenager during his dalliance with Annie at harvest time. It was upon a Lammas night when corn rigs are bonny. Beneath the moon's unclouded light I held a water Annie. The time flew by with careless speed, till tween the late and early. With small persuasion she agreed to see me through the barley. Corn rigs and barley rigs and corn rigs are bonny. I'll ne'er forget that happy night among the rigs wi' Annie. Other pieces concerning the lassies reveal a more respectful and mature Burns, such as a Red, Red Rose, written in 1794, some 2 years before he died. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. So fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till the seas gang dry. Through his lifetime, Robert Burns fathered 14 children, only 3 surviving beyond infancy, and 9 born by his only wife, Jean Arnold. The reputation of a sexually opportunist and philandering Burns may be balanced by his sense of equality and his view that women should be given equal status to men in society. In 1792, he wrote The Rights of Women, the first verse being, While Europe's eye fixed on mighty things, the fate of empires and the fall of kings, while quacks of state must each produce his plan, and even children lisp the rights of man. Amid this mighty fuss, just let me mention, the rights of women merit some attention. He then goes on to mention protection, decorum, and admiration being due to women by men, which is probably the best it could get in those times. Now, a footnote to Burns's many infidelities features in Holy Willie's Prayer, which takes a shot at religious hypocrisy by the Kirk and is based on a real-life William Fisher, who was an elder of the local church and who was publicly pious and righteous, but in private did not practice what he preached. One of the verses in Burns's poem has the High Churchman Holy Willie begging God's pardon for having bedded a woman, Meg, who was not his wife. O Lord, yestreen, thou kens we Meg, thy pardon I sincerely beg. Omit ne'er be a living plague to my dishonour, and I'll never lift a lawless leg again upon her. Burns's ire against the church originated partly from having had to endure public humiliation, sitting on the cutty stool, which was at the front of the pulpit before a full congregation, in order to atone, in this case, for making Elizabeth Patten, a family servant, pregnant. Elizabeth Patten bore his first child in 1785, but they did not marry. Born into a desperately poor farming family that was always at the mercy of insouciant landlords, Burns often took a shot at the ruling classes and their exploitation of the common people, who had very little in the way of representation and rights, and in some cases were effectively slaves in their own country. In Address of Beelzebub, the devil's advocate ironically praises the land-owning gentry, in this case the Earl of Breadalbane, for basically owning his tenant farms and preventing their escape from penury and their emigration to Canada. Long life, my lord, and health be yours, unscathed by hungered Hieland boors. Lord, grant me duddy desperate beggar, we dirk claymore or rusty trigger, may twin old Scotland owe a life she likes as lambskins like a knife. Slavery was also lampooned by Burns. In the Slave's Lament, written in 1792, when the movement to abolish slavery in British colonies was already underway, and the French had outlawed same after their revolution of 1789, the poem opens with a slave's sad reflection on being forced to leave his native Senegal. It was in sweet Senegal that my foes did me enthrall, for the lands of Virginia, O, torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more, and alas, I am weary, O. Turning to Burns, the Republican, Burns showed sympathy and support for the American War of Independence, the Irish independence movement, which culminated in the Irish Rebellion of 1798 after Burns had died, and he boldly expressed his support of the French Revolution in a poem of 1794 or 95, Why Should We Idly Waste Our Time? Proud priests and bishops we'll translate and canonize as martyrs, the guillotine on piers shall wait, and knights shall hang in garters. Those despots long have trod us down, and judges are their engines. Such wretched minions of a crown demand the people's vengeance. Today 'tis theirs, tomorrow we shall don the cap of liberty. Quite unequivocal. Well, I have poorly covered but a slither of the immortal memory of Robert Burns, and would now like to return to where we started. That is to say, good riddance to 2020. I think we have reason to be more hopeful, as we enter 2021. At least the blonde hooligan is gone, and the 46th President of America has got off to a good start in putting climate change and a return to international engagement with due respect to a rules-based order. My view is that Burns, an internationalist, an advocate for liberty, equality and justice, would have approved of this, and the world can still benefit from his wisdom, insight and humour. And I also think we'd agree he was politically very much on the right side of history. I would now like to propose a toast to the immortal memory of Burns. The immortal memory of Burns.